according to the United Nations, there is only one president, who is Alassane Ouattara.
Hamadoun Touré there. Now, rebels have killed at least 40 South Sudanese army soldiers in clashes. The Sudan People's Liberation Army were fighting militia led by renegade General George Athor, according to officials. The army says Athor's forces attacked a key oil installation in the Jonglei region on Sunday. Southern Sudan voted for independence in a January referendum, but there's been ongoing tension in some areas. To Nigeria now, where more than 1,000 doctors are into their 4th week of strikes. Patients are being left untreated while the doctors in Lagos state hospitals, the country's busiest, demand a pay hike. Yvonne Ndege has more.
A nurse tends to a patient in one of Nigeria's busiest hospitals. She has to because not one doctor is on duty. This is a state-run hospital in Lagos. It normally treats up to 3,000 patients a day. But after strike action by more than 1,000 doctors in state hospitals, it means nurses are on the front line. Despite their care, an untold number of people have died, and more die daily. The doctors are demanding the same salary as their counterparts enjoy working in federal government hospitals. State-employed doctors currently earn a starting salary of $700 a month, nearly 30% less than doctors working in federal hospitals.
We happen to be part of the public. What the public suffers, we suffer. It is because we are suffering. That is why we are lamenting. I mean, you see what happened in Egypt, happening in Libya. People want to be free. Being a civil servant does not make you a slave. So you don't have to be treated like a slave.
Patients seeking medical care can wait days for attention.
Dozens of beds at this hospital lay empty, not because there aren't patients that need treatment, but because patients know that doctors are on strike. And one nurse told us off camera she believes that patients are now going to practitioners of traditional African medicines to get their treatment.
The provision of medical services for Lagos State's 18 million people is huge. The government says it can't afford to bring their wages up to federal standards.
We have resource constraints because they are not the only people. And to me, what has been offered now is almost 90% of what they're asking for. To us, that is not enough to call out a strike action because at the end of the day, it's the people of Lagos State that are suffering. And that's our stand. And it's an appeal to them to consider the plight of the people.
But with the strike in its 4th week, there seems to be no end in sight to the standoff, leading to fears that even more people who can't get treatment will suffer or die. Yvonne Ndege, AlJazeera, Lagos State, Nigeria.
Still much more to come on the program, including Gaddafi's military might. We look at the extent of his fighting power.
And I'm Nazanin Moshiri in Tunis, reporting on the political crisis that's gripping this country.
March on Al Jazeera. In 2009, Al Jazeera visited the cities worst affected by the financial downturn. Now, 2 years later, we return as European leaders discuss the debt crisis.
In a new 8-part series, Al Jazeera looks at women's rights and maternal health. Real women and their personal stories.
It's 20 years since the Arab League held its annual summit in Iraq. An Al Jazeera News special has full coverage from Baghdad.
As revolution sweeps across the Arab world, Al Jazeera has a special season of documentaries looking behind the news.
From local traders to international finance, it's commerce that makes the world go round. For global companies and developing markets, communication is the currency, and information is the most valuable commodity. Counting the cost at this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. You're watching Al Jazeera. A reminder of our top stories. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi delivered a 3-hour-long public address in Tripoli on Wednesday. In his address, he absolved himself of any responsibility for the violence. He blamed Al-Qaeda for the unrest. Well, there's been fighting in a number of key Libyan cities, including the important oil town of Breka. It's currently in opposition control. Our correspondent says he saw a Libyan Air Force jet dropping at least 2 bombs on opposition fighters. The Arab League has called on the Gaddafi government to stop attacks on Libyans. It's also saying that it could impose a no-fly zone over the country in conjunction with the African Union. Well, Clovis Maqsood is the former Arab League ambassador to the UN and joins us now live from Washington. Thanks a lot for joining us, Mr. Maqsood. Given your experience and your knowledge of the Arab League, what's the likelihood of the Arab League and the African Union teaming up, as was proposed by Amr Moussa, in imposing a no-fly zone or any other tangible, real measure against Libya?
Well, first of all, I think that they want to prevent the perception of international intervention. They want to be the first people to propose this and try to make available this no-fly zone because of the past experience, which was bitter in the past decades when the United States undertook a no-fly zone in the northern part of Iraq. And so in that sense, they are weary, and rightly so, of having a sort of ultimate division in the area. And so the unity of Libya is important. The fact that they don't want any kind of bombing by the Libyan Authority, whatever remains of it, over the liberated territories. They want to keep the unity of Libya. And I think that if they can succeed in availing certain air forces from South Africa, for example, and Egypt and perhaps other countries, I think that would be an adequate thing. The important thing is the question whether it will be sufficient. If it is not sufficient, the need is that, inasmuch as it is authorized under Chapter 7 to have a no-fly zone, it might be important to have a prevailing Arab League and African Union Air Force, but on the other hand,
I mean, the point being,
there is no need.
It would be unprecedented. It would take a lot of hard work to reach that. It seems to be a bit of wishful thinking for the moment, doesn't it?
Well, it might be that they couldn't have done this unless they have consulted with some of the military establishments in some of the African countries who are willing to undertake this task. But there is no need also to be exclusive if they don't have the total capacity to undertake this mission, because every country is under Chapter 7 responsible to implement by all means the enforcement measure of having the security of the people of